Morgan, what's up, man?
Hey, Jason, how are you? It's
I'm
good to
great. How about you?
see you. Yes, happy Thursday. Happy Thursday. Oh, we might have lost Jason.
Oh, nope, I'm right here.
Okay, we're good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for hopping on with us. Super excited for today's topic, based off of engagement and signups and stuff like that we had from the community. Clearly, everybody else is as well. So I'd say you hit it out of the park, at least as far as topic selection so far. But before, go ahead.
Let's hope I can deliver on the promise.
Yeah, that's the thing about setting a high bar. Then you got to
I
cross it.
know.
But before we hop into all of that, give yourself a quick intro. Let everybody know who you are.
Sure. Awesome. Well, hey everybody, thanks for being here. If you're here, would love to see you drop a hi in chat. We'd love to say hello. Um, the um, I am a managing director at Aligned. We're a strategy and consulting company, but on LinkedIn, at least, I'm mostly known for hosting the B2B Power Hour, which is a podcast live show. And I talk a lot about social selling. My background is I'm actually a marketer by trade. So I got thrown into the sales side by my business partner. It's been a very good journey. And the yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm just excited to be here and talk about ways that sellers can adopt social into their sales process, and also maybe bust some myths along the way. I mean, I don't know. We'll see where we
God
go.
knows there's plenty of them to be busted. That's for sure.
Yeah, that there is.
So before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, want to talk really quickly about what your take and experience has been on social versus other channels for being able to do outbound outreach and do actual selling in. Because in my experience, it's shifted dramatically over the last 2-ish years as far as like what are the effective go-to-market channels as well as tactics, techniques.
It has changed a lot. I it's funny as you bring that up. One of the thoughts that I had, since I started out in marketing, I used to build websites and I did email marketing campaigns back in the day. And this was like 2009, 2010.
I was going to ask.
And it was,
That sounded
yeah.
like the time I was cutting my teeth. So
Okay, yeah. And mostly in B2C. And now I remember like it was such a big deal when MailChimp had like their first email automation sequence you could send out. And in some ways, I think B2B is sort of playing catch up. And I think the big demarcation point has been the pandemic. I think everybody went digital, and these new channels have opened up in crazy opportunities to reach buyers. But maybe the rules of the game have switched a little bit, where if I was talking with a VP of sales the other day, and he's like, "Why?" It's so funny. He's like, "Why are people leaving me voicemails that just say, 'Hey, Jason, call me back'?" He's like, "What? I don't know who you are. Why are you?" And that tactic worked once upon a time, and
right.
now that the landscape has shifted, and it's shifting in front of us, and LinkedIn is no different.
Yeah, I mean, for me at least, I mean, I've managed BDR teams at every organization I've been at under typically the marketing growth whatever to manage a go-to-market umbrella as opposed to by a sales leader. And for me, like other channels outside of social and in particular LinkedIn dried up 2+ years ago. And it's like virtually impossible to get an email to land in an inbox, especially if you're using a sequencing tool or sending it any sort of volume. And hell, at this point, you're lucky if it doesn't shut down that individual's inbox, much less to damage the entire domain and threaten everybody's deliverability. We all know what trying to get somebody on the phone's like. Yeah, we've all gotten sophisticated with it. The carriers have started flagging stuff as spam. Harder than ever to get hands on direct dial phone numbers. They're more expensive. Even when you do, they don't pick them up. And so it's like, what are you left with? It's basically LinkedIn. Like that's really it.
It's true. Honestly, it's you're really only left with social, which is a huge opportunity. Just to sort of kick off this idea today, because it's like, if you do it right, there is such upsized opportunity. I think the problem is a lot of sales teams.
Absolutely.
The channel as it's designed. I don't know if my camera's sorry if that's the case.
Let's see. I'll give you just a second.
Sorry about that. I guess my system is just having some issues today, so we're gonna have a little fun. We'll see how long this lasts.
It's never a dull moment in live episodes.
It's been here before, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So, LinkedIn.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so yeah, I mean, as far as we've all seen it. Like it's way too often people are looking for the easy button. In fact, you can argue that's a lot of the reason and culprit for why we landed and where we are relative to the other channels we just talked about no longer working. So hopefully we can avoid doing that to ourselves when it comes to social selling. And by the way, I see so much of the same stuff going on the community side of things, with everything, the dying of these channels and the, drawing back of funding and stuff like that. Community-led growth became a big buzzword. But what I see people doing with that more often than not is community-led demand gen, which is not a great way to do anything under a community umbrella. And so you see a lot of the same mistakes, I think, in both contexts.
Sorry. I'm here. I was listening. It's actually interesting, I think, to sort of kick off this discussion. One of the main mistakes that I see sellers make more often than not is that they only go direct on social. And if we back off LinkedIn for a second, I don't know if you've had the privilege to go to a trade conference recently or like an in-person event, and they're a bunch of fun, especially like post-pandemic when we're all holed up in our own homes. The in-person experience is awesome. And I think what we forget is that LinkedIn is a networking platform and it rewards good networking habits. It's not a content platform. It doesn't reward good content habits. If it did, it would be like TikTok right now. Okay. We would all understand the algorithm and how to go viral, but we don't, because it rewards good networking habits. And the mistake is that if you were at a trade show and you just walked around to a bunch of random people, well, to them, you're random, but your targets, your prospects, et cetera. And you said, Jason, hey, Jason, I'm Morgan. I offer these services. We should sit down and have a conversation. You'd look at me. You'd be like, you're a crazy person. What are you doing? Why are you talking to me? Like, that's a weird way to approach somebody. And the same principle applies on LinkedIn. Only going direct, only, using InMails, for example, is not a great way to start conversations with people on the platform because it's just not good networking habits.
Yeah, as the very first co-founder in my first B2B SaaS company used to call. So his background was in fundraising for universities and higher ed, which is a hell of a hard pitch. Like, hey, will you give me money for nothing in return? And so like he really honed a lot in a really, really tough environment. And what he always called it was non-creepy excuses to reach out to people. And that was all he was ever looking for. Because it was like if he tried to go in just straight up cold, he was going to get shut down almost every single time.
Yes. And how many InMails do you get, or to everybody in the audience, how many InMails do you receive that are creepy or like weird, messages you get?
Even read them? I don't.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I was talking with a VP at a company we work with, and I was like, do you respond? Like, do you even look at your InMails? And he cracked this joke. He's like, oh yeah, I get like 3 a day. And if I'm really bored one night, I may pull up a couple, but otherwise they sort of just end up in the other tab, and I'm not going to be reading them anyways. Yeah.
It's about the best guaranteed way that I will never see it.
Yes, correct. And it's true across lots of industries and lots of people you're trying to sell to. Yeah.
Yeah. So that begs the question then, what do you do?
It's a good question. So I think there's a few ways to sort of tackle this. And the most important thing in our work to realize is that social selling or using social to connect with prospects, there is a process to it, or there are rules of the game, just like there are rules of the game on cold email or cold calling or any other channel you're using. And the easiest distillation that I have is obey vampire sales. So in folklore, vampires were not allowed into your home unless if they were invited. And so the idea of vampire sales is you don't pitch unless if you're invited to pitch. Now think about this. You know you have a list. Maybe you're using Sales Navigator, maybe you're not, but you know you have a list of 100 leads that you want to connect with, get in front of, maybe eventually convert into qualified opportunities or close won deals. And if from day one you could not pitch them until, or you couldn't really tell them a lot about what you're doing, et cetera, until they say, Jason, so tell me, what do you do? And I've had this a lot where it's like, all right, fine, Morgan, tell me, what do you do? Or like, that's really interesting. Is this related to what you do at work, et cetera? If you just lean into that principle, if you just say, look, I'm here to show up, I'm here to engage, and I'm not going to pitch until I'm invited to, it transforms the whole game. And so this is a mentality shift before we get to this tactical or strategic stuff, because the number of sellers that I've interacted with have designed their profiles, have designed their outreach strategies, have designed all their engagement strategies to pitch. They say, well, I'm going to put SDR at whatever company in my profile, and I'm going to go send a bunch of emails, or I'm going to write a personalized connection request. And I'm going to say, hey, it's really worth your time to like have a meeting with me. More often than not, they don't understand that. So they're not going to book time, or they're just going to ignore your connection request. And worse, they're just going to see you as a salesperson. And the truth is, like, your LinkedIn profile is yours. Your LinkedIn presence is yours. It's not your company's. So if you lean into this idea of vampire sales, if you lean into, I'm not going to pitch unless I'm invited, I'm here to build strong relationships with people in this industry, to understand their pains and problems, to show up, to be inspired, to engage, to learn. That is the starting point. That's where all of the magic sauce happens, is from that point. And it leads to a very different engagement strategy to connect with prospects.
Absolutely does. But I mean, you mentioned the profile. So given that that's the first thing that people are going to see a lot of times, or at least secondary to that initial message, whether it's an InMail or not. What are your tips on how to design that properly?
So I think there's a lot of noise on LinkedIn, right or wrong, about how to build the best profile. So I'm not going to contribute.
A lot of noise on LinkedIn, but
yeah, I could have just ended that full stop, and you're like, yeah, that's true. So I'm not going to contribute to the noise too much, but I will say this, like, as a result of our work in helping sales teams do this and then experimenting on ourselves, we really have just come back to 3 principles for sellers. If you have a profile and you want to become like a personal brand and become an evangelist or an influencer, very different play. But if you're a salesperson and you want to connect with your prospects and you want to nurture those relationships, it's really only 3 principles. One is you got to pass the 3-second test. And the 3-second test is that snap judgment we all make when we land on somebody's profile and we think, all right, am I going to be pitched, or is this actually worth my time to connect with somebody? And all that is a smiling profile photo, a cover photo that could be about your company, but isn't just like some generic mountainscape background. Like it's something meaningful, and a headline that talks about the category you're in or why you're on the platform. The mistake we see so often is a seller will have like AE at whatever company, SDR at aligned, right? And what happens is when you send that connection request, the only thing they see is your smiling face, your name, and SDR at align. And the first thought today, and this wasn't true 18 months ago, is, oh God, this Jason's going to pitch me. And I think we've all been in that circumstance where we've seen a profile and we think, oh, this person isn't worth connecting because, they're going to pitch me. So you have to pass the 3-second test. A great headline sounds like exploring this or working to help companies like this. Stay away from all the return language, the ROI language. Nobody really cares about that. Think about good networking. What are you passionate about? What are you interested in? And put that in your headline. Add a little personality or flair as is appropriate. And then the other two are really straightforward. It's like a landing page. Your profile is a landing page. That's principle 2. So give them some options in your featured links, in your experience section, to go learn more about your company or go learn more about yourself. And then the third principle is it's more than just LinkedIn. If you're sending an email, people will check your LinkedIn profile. So this isn't just about using LinkedIn either, right? How many times you smile at that? I know I've searched up people on LinkedIn whenever I get a cold email from them, and it's a very common behavior. So it's not just about sending the connection request. It's also about building that relationship with a prospect when you're using other channels, right? To try and reach them.
100%. I mean, we launched Rev Room, which is our exclusive paid tier of Rev Genius, month and a half, 2 months ago. Time is absolutely blurring at this point, but we actually go through like a vetting qualification process, and step 1 is go to LinkedIn. See both what their work history is, what their vibe looks like on there, and what type of content they're posting. And so that's our very first piece that we've got to get, that you've got to clear from a qualification standpoint.
Yes. And again, like the way that I know that the 3-second test is happening and it's a good landing page is if you send a blank connection request, no personalization, no whatever, to a second-degree connection, 50% or more of those people accept it. That's the benchmark number. If you're at 30% or below, you're in trouble. You need to rework your profile before you do anything else, okay? But if you're sending a blank connect request to somebody who you have some mutual connections with, but maybe you don't know yet and you want to get to know, and half the time they're saying yes, that's a great starting point. If it's lower than that, you're in trouble. You got to continue workshopping some of those things.
Yep. Which begs the question, everybody's got their take on it. Do you include a message with a second-degree connection request?
So, my principle is it depends on the strategy you're using. So, there's a few different buckets, but I would say bucket 1 are you seeking an immediate response? And the problem is most sellers think it's a good idea to get an immediate response. And so they think most of my leads should be in bucket 1, right? And that's not the case. Okay. So bucket 1 leads are people in which you can identify a reason that they should want you as much as you want them. And that means there's a trigger, there's an insight, there's something at play that's time sensitive. And that if you reached out 60 days from now, it's not as good as it is today. And you have to be really humble about this. If you're selfish about this as a seller and you say, oh gosh, today I have to reach all my leads and 60 days from now, whatever, I don't care, Morgan, that's going to get you in hot water because a lot of people will ignore it. And so you're not going to get a return on effort. So usually that's like a handful of leads a month are in bucket 1. And that's the personalization. Bucket 2 is somebody that you met in real life or somebody that you met in an event and you have a shared knowledge or a shared circumstance. You say, Jason, hey man, really appreciated the webinar or the live show that you were on. Would love to connect and ask a question, right? Start that conversation in the personalized connection request based on shared context. Bucket 3 is blank. And I think the problem that people make about personalization or the problem that people don't understand about personalized connection requests is that it is prompting action. And so as the seller, you have to ask, what is the action that I am trying to prompt? If it's book a meeting with me, you better have a damn good reason for them to book a meeting with you, because most buyers are going to tune you out. They're going to say, no way, I don't need your shit. I'm not going to pay it. I don't care. Okay. So you got to have a really compelling reason. Jason, you're about to crash the car. Okay. If you don't talk with me, you're going to crash your car and I can help you avoid crashing your car. Otherwise, leave it blank, because when it's blank, you have more options. You can follow up 2 weeks later. Say, hey, I saw we got connected. Start a conversation over a shared passion, over something industry-wise, an industry trend, a learning and development play. Or use content, if you're posting content, as a nurture sequence. So instead of using content as a way to like promote your personal brand, use content to educate them in feed. And that is great for blank connect requests, right? So one last little tidbit here. We did some research with a bunch of sellers that we work with and then with sellers in our broader audience. And The bottom 50% of sellers, the sellers who were average or a little bit below, were leading messaging wise with pains and problems on LinkedIn. They were either personalizing connect requests or DMs or whatever, using pains and problems as the reason to reach out. The top 2% were leading with one of two things. One was learning and development. So they're a student of their craft. They're a student of the industry. They're concerned about market trends or whatever other reason they're showing up on LinkedIn. And you're opening up a conversation about learning and development, not about the play, right? Not about the product or the service you sell. Number 2 was passion. Okay. You can use Sales Navigator's keyword search. And I can drop a link to where we break this down somewhere. But so Nick, my business partner, is a big beer head. Okay. And so sure, you could put beer, right? He brews his own beer. He's competitive, all the rest of it. So you could put beer in the search and find people who have beer somewhere in their profile. But then you could go craft beer, which is a little bit deeper. And then the deepest is like lambic, which is a particular style of beer. And of course, if somebody puts lambic in their profile, they're kind of a beer nerd. And so you know what's a great way to start a conversation with somebody? Talk about some shared passions, man. Right? If you come to my profile, you can start a conversation with me about whiskey, tacos. I love economics because I studied that. And it's all in my about section. And so the top 2% of sellers were not leading with pains and problems to start conversations. What they were leading with was either what's going on in the industry or how are you growing in your role sort of conversations. Here's an interesting resource. Have you seen this before? All sorts of ways to start that. Or passion. Hey, man, I see you're super passionate about lambic beers. Do you think this? Or some sort of creative way to tie that in. So that's sort of a drawn out response to the personalization idea, but that's what we see works right now.
So you mean we should be authentic and try and provide value?
We're done. Signed off. We're live show over. Strange idea, I know.
I feel like I'm in a never-ending loop of like, hey, back to basics. Do the things we've known we should have been doing from the very start, going back decades. So now, this year versus last year, back to basics again. Back to basics
Strange
again.
how it works.
Are we ever going to learn this lesson?
Well, and especially, I think one of the mistakes I think people learned from the last couple of years is that what worked a year and a half ago still works today. And that's just not true. And like the reason I think the basics are so important is they're basics for a reason. They're the fundamentals for a reason. And many are timeless. So if they're timeless, keep on using them. We're just in a new era, new little rules of the game, but those fundamentals are where the magic happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who spent most of his career in quote unquote growth, one of the terms I despise the most is growth hacks.
Oh,
because like talk about something that is self-defeating in so many ways. It's like it's going to be temporary because it's going to take only so long for everybody else to figure out what you're doing and replicate it. The people you're targeting are going to get sophisticated really fast. And now you're back to spending all of your time trying to come up with what's the next growth hack instead of perfecting and honing those fundamental foundational things that actually allow you to reliably scale, which at the heart of the definition of growth is what you're supposed to be doing, not finding hacks.
What? We're supposed to reach our prospects with something useful and insightful, and
I swear, to use data to figure out the sustainable ways to do things.
Strange idea, Jason. I don't know about that. But even 14, 15 months ago, it was like early last year. One of the great plays on LinkedIn to open up a conversation was a blank connect followed up with like a, how have you been? How's it been going? Whenever they accepted it. And it's really funny because today you do that, you get clobbered. One, people will never respond to that message anymore because people abused that hack, to your point. It was a growth hack where, oh, this was the best way to get people to respond. And then immediately, and I use the term selfish here, selfish sellers, people who are all about them and not about the buyer, would just launch into a pitch. And so then through all of the noise and through the competitive effect, as you said, once everybody started piling in on that, all these prospects, all these buyers said, I'm not going to either accept the blank connect, or when they say, how have you been? I'm just not going to respond because I know I'm going to get pitched. And again, that's where it's like any little hack that gets you a little bit further, 2% further today isn't sustainable, right? It's all about these fundamentals.
So there's two aspects of what you've talked about as far as being authentic and providing value. Both of those they're obviously not easy buttons. They're also obviously, for the most part, if you're doing it correctly, not a very short and oftentimes not a straight line.
No.
And it requires effort, it requires time, and so that then becomes the challenge of how do you actually do that efficiently, because you're doing motions that if you look at it motion to motion, that time and thought commitment for each one of those steps or motions becomes heavier than any of the things you're doing. So you're trading volume for quality, but that requires you being good at doing and efficient at doing that quality side of things. Oh.
So sorry.
I was afraid I ran you away.
Hold on. I don't understand why that just happened. I'm so sorry, Jason.
No, you're good, man. It's fine. So back to that. We've got to be efficient in what we're doing. So what are your suggestions on that side of things? Do you have a playbook or certain things to focus on? Or
100%. So I think this sort of comes back to I really dislike activities as a way to talk about this, because really the way that I think about this is, what's the strategy we're rolling out to get in front of prospects and buyers, warm up those relationships, and then convert them to qualified opportunities when it makes sense. And then there are a bunch of tactics. So in terms of a hub for intelligence, Sales Navigator is great. If you don't have a license for Sales Nav, it's okay. You can do most of the stuff without it. But Sales Navigator can serve as a central organizing hub for all of it. And you don't have to make it super complicated, right? One of the things that I prefer, so most of the sellers we work with are handed an account list, okay? So there might be a CRM sync set up, but it's like, here are the 400 accounts we want to go after, or here's the persona we want you to prospect. Versus small business. Apparently, my camera is it weird, Jason? Did my camera just go off?
Yep. Apologies, guys, for the technical difficulties.
Somebody in chat dropped that it's not a live show without tech issues, and I can't agree more. I'm sorry, everybody. I swear. So the Sales Navigator, if you're fed an account list, what you can do is you save that, and then all you have to do is create 3 lead lists. 3 lead lists. And what you're doing is you have new leads, you have working leads, and you have priority leads, for example. So new leads are people you want to reach out to, but you haven't yet. Working are the leads that you have reached out to, but you haven't gotten a response yet. And priority are those that you have reached out to and you have a response. That's it. Don't do anything else. Don't do anything crazy. Just start, because this is the strategic organizing principle for a lot of this. If you have all of that information, now we can go do tactics. Now we can say, all right, for the new people, I'm going to send a blank connection request to them, because I'm posting content and I want them to see my content in feed. The people who I'm working, who haven't responded yet, maybe I need to go see them commenting somewhere so then I can respond to their comment. This is a tactic, and start a conversation so then they accept my connection request. Or I'm going to have a conversation with them. I haven't sent a connection request, but I'm going to have some comments first before I send it, so then I can get it guaranteed. And then priority, I got to send them a DM. It's funny because they responded to my connection request about a beer or whatever with a funny response, and oh, they're in my priority list. I got to make sure to go back to that and have some DMs and have a good conversation.
Uh-oh.
I have found the issue, and it is a new Mac update. And yes, somebody from tech support needs to pitch slap me in my connection request because apparently I need to get it fixed. Apologies. So all of those are tactics because the those are all plays that you can roll out. Those are all things that you can do. And so the way that I structure my time is 30 minutes, a 30-minute routine. If you're doing more than this, you're wasting time scrolling in the feed. Okay. And I know you've been there, Jason, right? Where you start doom scrolling and you're like, oh my God, I just wasted an hour and a half looking at nonsense in this feed. What am I doing?
No, you're talking to somebody that yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're talking to somebody that is that is diagnosed and treated ADD, but it only treats it so far. So like I am as dangerous going into something like that as you can get.
That's funny. So 30 minutes, what do you do with those 30 minutes? Well, it depends on how you're working these lists. So the way that I do it is if I have I work backwards. I start with priority, then I go to working, then I go to new. And then I just segment out my time in the day. I'm going to spend 30 minutes at 8:30 a.m. and then I'm going to do 30 minutes maybe at 1. If I have the time, maybe I have other stuff I need to do, right? Lots of teams don't only use social to prospect. Chances are you got to put in dials, you got to do emails, you got to do research, everything else. So maybe you can only do 2 chunks, right? 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon. And all you do is you just work the list in reverse. You start with the people you already are having conversations with, and you have more conversations. Obey vampire sales. Don't pitch until you're asked. Okay. And then you go to working, people that you've contacted but haven't gotten a response yet. So maybe you send a connection request, you send a comment. Go find another excuse to engage with them, right? Be like, hey, have they posted anything recently? Or, have they commented on something that I could have a good conversation on? Or I actually haven't sent them a connection request, even though we had a good conversation in the comments. And then from there, you go to new and you say, okay, who haven't I reached yet at these accounts that I need to talk to? One little pro tip I've learned from the road is don't have all of your lists be VPs, please. It's so and you laugh, Jason, but you wouldn't laugh if you seen the number of lead lists that I have.
I laugh because I have.
Okay. No, it's a big problem. Okay. VPs in particular, C-suite folks, are really sensitive to the ways that they're engaging on the platform. And if you're selling something smaller dollar value, it may take a little bit more time, but especially if you're doing mid-market or enterprise deals, start with managers and directors who are on the platform. Don't start with the VPs. There's a lot of reasons to do that. You can build a business case, you can get insight, you can build the relationship. Chances are, though, that person, that the manager director, is going to be on the buying committee anyways. They're going to have input anyways. So you might as well start there and then work your way up. The other reason is a little bit sneakier and a little more strategic. Let's say you're trying to break into a larger account, okay? And so there's 20 people at the company you need to probably get in front of. If you're able to connect with 15 of those who are managers and directors through comments or connect requests, etc., then when you go to the VP and you send the connect request, it's going to have 15, 20 mutual connections already. And it's going to be very different than just going cold. And that's another reason to stay patient and invest those 30 minutes on priority working new so that it's not as scattershot and it's a lot more strategic.
Yeah, I'll add one more to that, and it's I was turned on to this because I was the example of it. It's virtually impossible to get in front of me to pitch a solution, whether it's a product, a service, whatever, uh, in any other form factor, way, tactic, avenue, than somebody that's a direct report to me. 95+% of the time, if I'm evaluating or reviewing something, it's because one of my direct reports brought it to me, not because somebody got in front of me and pitched it directly.
But isn't that the truth? Because like we've always talked about this as like the earthquake. You know, in an organization, if a problem exists, the VP is not at the center of the earthquake. A direct report is, or a manager below them is. If you're selling a software that solves automation challenges, the person who is not able to automate their current workflow is screwed. And so you should talk with them about that challenge first, because the VP is at least 2-3 rings out from the epicenter of the earthquake. And so you want to start with the people who are actually having the problems that you solve, and not somebody who just is the economic buyer and signs the check and has some questions, right? Like there's very different approaches there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, even if I am that close to the epicenter and I know exactly like this is the problem we need to solve for, we need to go and look at and evaluate tech that's going to do X, Y, or Z. It's one of my direct reports that's going out there and doing that tier 1 qualification. They're going to come back to me with a short list of things we need to deep dive into, sit through a demo on, whatever. But it's the last thing I've got time to do and go out and get, my arms around all of the vendors and players and the ins and the outs and what it can do and all of that stuff.
It's just not worth it. And that's I think this is where what you're pointing to, which is something I love focusing on, is like, what are the stages of the buyer's journey? Because and this is, I think, the mistake that a lot of sellers make. Most buyers are not prospects. Most buyers are students. They're still learning. They don't know all of the things about the industry that you do. And so if most of the buyers that you're targeting, if most of the people that you're going after are just in their student stage, maybe they know a problem exists, but they don't know the categories, they don't know all of the solutions, etc. They're not yet a prospect trying to figure out how to solve the problem, and they're not yet an active buyer who's like, all right, I'm ready to sign something. What's the tool I should, purchase? Then our approach to those students needs to assume that they're students and not that they're buyers. We need to assume they're still learning, which is also why starting with learning and development and passion is a much more natural approach to those buyers, because that's the stage of the buying process they're in. They're not yet evaluating. They're not ready to sign a check yet. They may not even know they have a problem, Like, what? Jason, you're saying I shouldn't work like that? That's weird.
Absolutely. So I'll go a little bit off topic, and it's one that you can, I'm sure you can take a guess at what my thoughts or opinions are on. How should outbound teams be structured from a go-to-market standpoint? Like, should they, for a long time now, it's been just a volume HR problem. Like, we just put enough butts in seats and we hand them tech that allows them to do stuff at high enough scale, and they're going to be over there in their pit doing their thing while all the rest of us do, the combined go-to-market motion. Obviously, I think for most everybody, we realized how stupid that was. And actually, by the way, try and go talk to somebody outside of our space in our echo chamber and describe that model and see the reaction you get. It's like, all right, how in the hell did we do 10 plus years where everyone thought this was the best way to do something?
It is rapidly changing for everyone, I think. And I think the way I begin to think about this question, Jason, is that buyers have changed. And that is the reason go-to-market teams need to change. So the reality is, like, people are more informed than ever, and yet they also tune out more than ever. And so I think there's a real, like, we call it the brick wall in our consulting work. It's this like mental spam filter people have. They just like stop paying attention to stuff. It's like, your 37 touch campaign has probably failed on touch number 4 because they haven't responded. All right. And 37 isn't going to get you there. So from a resourcing side, I think there are crucial mistakes we see a lot in our work. And this comes back to alignment, hence aligned in the our consulting gigs, is that marketing and sales are often targeting this different people, which is hilarious when you think about it and very problematic. And then they forget to loop in customer success as well. About like, who are your power users? Who are the best customers? Who are the most profitable customers? Who saw proof of value? This is always really funny. Sales has a value hypothesis, but customer success has a proof of value. They can say these customers saw value really, really quickly, and it should inform your targeting. So from actually setting up the motion, I think there's a lot of opinions about like where a sales development function lives. Is it staffed with SDRs and BDRs? But it probably reports more into the marketing side of the company, in my opinion.
Is
I
that,
think
is that
there's.
how it should be, or how you think it typically is?
Oh, I think it's more like it should be that, because
That's what I
it's
figured.
not typically like that. Yeah. and I think that the real challenge that this poses, and this is actually, I think if there's one question go-to-market leaders need to answer, it's, are your account executives full cycle? That's it. I think that answers a lot of challenges, because if your account executives are not full cycle and they rely exclusively on the sales development team and the marketing team to generate qualified leads for them, then that sales development team and the marketing team need to be incredibly tight in terms of the way they're running campaigns and their targeting and their messaging and everything else. If your account executives are full cycle and they own their own book of business and they are prospecting on the company's behalf, there's maybe a little more wiggle room about how the resourcing happens, because they're one person alone. And maybe there's supplemental SDR work to the account executive, or maybe you don't have sales development at all, and you let the account executives do all of their own prospecting, and marketing helps fuel them through brand work and demand gen and all the rest of it. So, more than the I don't know, talent resourcing, I think about like, is everybody going after the same people? Because like that doesn't happen. Like sales has their own idea when they're prospecting, separate from when marketing is going out and running brand campaigns. Oftentimes they're saying different things, which is problematic. And that is the real challenge, I think, that they have to solve.
Yeah, 100%. I was actually on an analyst call earlier this week, and we were doing a deep dive into cell sequencing tools and the nature. What's the state of that market? And I was like, to be honest, I'd be terrified if I was one of those companies right now, because it's like it was built for a different motion and a different use case than everything is being moved to. And I think there's a strong argument to be made that where we are, both from a problem we're trying to solve standpoint, but also the proliferation of outbound teams to begin with, is largely due to that tech and those, and what was, the tactics that were developed and enabled through it. And so it takes a radically different approach to it, but I also think it points to one of the challenges relative to it and why a lot of people struggle, because there is not a piece of tech, there's not a platform, there's not anything that really enables the ability to do and coordinate all of this stuff. It's it's where I think in 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a standard piece of tech stack on the go-to-market side to have a actual data orchestrator and a CDP, because it's the only way you can get all of this stuff pulled together in a centralized place and then distributed out to where it needs to go. But when you start talking about, hey, we need a Python developer to run Airflow to push into a Snowflake database, it's like somebody's eyes glazing over.
Yeah. Well, and I think you correctly point out the sort of I'll use this term, subsidizing we've had of an outbound model, mostly through VC money, that like when you actually run the numbers, it's not that sustainable. Like there's not a lot of financial momentum unless if you're selling really large deals with high ACV or a really high volume of deals. But honestly, if you're really having to sell a high volume number of deals, you should just do a product like Growth Motion, like that. I don't.
Oh, absolutely.
Or like,
I wonder how in the world an outbound team can keep up with
they can't.
velocity. Like it can't happen.
They can't. No, it's impossible. And I think the reason that we've been able to run this and is because there's been a lot of cheap free money to subsidize those operating expenses. so that companies have the runway to run it. But in all reality, if you actually had to do some unit economic analysis here and you broke down all the numbers, it doesn't look all that kind to the model.
Well, no, I mean, the bulk of my experience has been in bootstrap startups where I've never had that luxury. And in fact, my most recent one was just a bizarre experience. It was like I came in and ran growth for 5 quarters, and we 5x revenue, which sounds amazing. But like if you look at 5x revenue from like 3.5 to 20-ish that we got to, it's like, okay, yeah, that's impressive, whatever. But guess what we did over that same period of time? We raised $500 million.
That's insane.
That's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, that's absurd. That's crazy.
And I will go to my grave saying, I think the number one thing that large amounts of VC cash enables you to do is make really dumb fucking business decisions.
100% agreed. Yep. Well, and actually, one of the things that I see more often than not, and if you are in this situation, I actually feel really horrible for you, is that especially at these companies that have a lot of free cash, the poor individual SDR often has to solve for everything in the go-to-market motion, right? Like we were talking with a company the other day, and the direction that the SDRs have gotten is, here are your account list. Go. And it's like, whoa. There's prioritization. Who do you go after? Why them? What are criteria for targeting? And a lot of it is like, oh, we're just making it up on a fly. And, I get the idea of like moving fast and breaking things, like, cool, we're innovative and, whatever. But it's like the poor SDR, and if you are in this position, it's a horrible situation to be in, is solving for strategic things that leadership should be deciding in their place. There should be a shared definition of a good target. There should be a shared definition of buying stages or of pipeline stages and what it means. There should be shared definitions about like why to go after one account versus another. And chances are it has nothing to do with their head count, right? Like it's not about just having 5,000, seats purchased or whatever. And unfortunately, I think in that scale and in that pace, those decisions are left to the individual sales rep to figure out by themselves. And so then we end up, hence, talking today, where they're just like, well, I'm going to do whatever I can, because I'm going to send some InMails and see if I get any responses, or I'm going to set up a 17-step sequencer and see if we get anything out of it. And I love experimentation, but like there's ways to do it strategically.
Well, experimentation requires actually recording the data, analyzing the data, learning the lessons from it, like going and just throwing stuff at the wall and then not paying any attention to what's on it is not experimentation.
No, it's not. It's structured, and it should. And obviously, in my view, as I've said before, it should be driven by leadership and driven by management. Like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go test it out. Let's go have some fun. Let's see what we get out of it.
And I mean, to the largest degree, I believe that what we quote unquote call management or leadership relative to outbound or SDR teams consist of how are you doing on activities? Are you hitting your call count? Are you hitting your email count? Like, how many of those are converting? All of that stuff. And I mean, I learned this lesson months into my very first BDR team I ever built or managed. Be really careful what you focus on, and especially what you incentivize on. Because I mean, like my very first time I did it, and so I've got sympathy for people that default to this, but you ought to learn the lesson really quickly, was activity. And in particular was phone calls. And it was a few weeks after I rolled out the plan in which I had like a SPIF or something like that tied to number of calls or average dials, whatever. And I walked into the room and I witnessed whenever they would actually get somebody on the phone, first off would be like I've got to talk to somebody, because now it slowed them down. And then it was, how quick can I get off that call?
Which is it's what I love that you're pointing to is something we definitely focus on a lot, which is sort of a discipline on pipeline math in many ways. It's like, so for example, I know the sales team, each they sell into much larger mid-market enterprise. So each AE has a $2 million quota every year. you need to know your opportunity to close ratio so you can at least have any sense of sanity. Let's say it's 1 in 5. So they need $10 million of pipeline. Okay. Let's say they're, I like the simplicity of like an activation rate figure, which is just out of how many accounts you're targeting, how many are actually turning into qualified opportunities. And unfortunately, right now, it's like 1 in 20 or worse. So, that means to generate 10 million in pipeline, I know my average contract value is, let's say, for simplicity's sake, $1 million. So I need 10 accounts. My activation rate is maybe 1 in 20. So I need to go after 200 accounts to get to here. And yet there's no discipline because that is nothing to do with activities. If you call those 200 accounts 17 times a day, sure, you'll hit your activity metrics. That means nothing. That doesn't mean if they're going to convert to a qualified op. It requires a critical insight. And it requires all the good fundamentals of good outbound to actually activate those accounts and turn them into closed won deals.
Absolutely. And I think, we've danced around a little bit. We've not called it out explicitly, but I think, going forward and increasingly for teams right now, viability is tied so closely to finding actual true intent signaling.
Yes.
And so we've come at it from just like, hey, we'll find intent out of just barraging them with, messaging and activity and whatever, or hey, we're going to lean on a black box like a Bombor or something like that. It's going to tell me definitively what accounts to go after. And it's like, none of that really ever worked that well to begin with. I hate to tell anybody, and it really doesn't work now. And it takes a level of sophistication, it takes a level of creativity, but it's also super exciting if you get into it and start realizing how nuanced and how sophisticated a lot of this intent signaling that people have been able to start getting to and sussing out has really become. And to me, that's really exciting because it solves for so many of these things. Like, it makes the motion efficient from the outbound standpoint. It means they can actually focus on value add. And it means the people they're targeting are going to be largely receptive to it. Like, if 3/4 of the messages I got were talking about a problem I'm trying to solve for, I'd have a completely different attitude towards outbound.
Yes, exactly. And I think this ties in neatly with the LinkedIn idea that we've been starting with, which is like most of your buyers. Here are some examples of intent of signals that are not intent on LinkedIn: viewing your profile, following your company page, commenting like, oh, that's an interesting idea. None of those are intent signals. Those are not invitations to pitch. They're not invitations to go and say, hey, you should buy my product, or we should have a meeting so I can show you why you should buy my product. We're so we're so amazing. We're the number one product in the world sort of messages I get. And the point is, there's a graphic somewhere on social, and I can find it if people want to, DM me if you want to see this. But the whole idea of social is that instead of waiting for the buyer to go to pipeline in order to build credibility, which is often what happens off of cold calls, you get a call out of the blue, you go, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. And then an evaluation process starts in which you try and build credibility and trust. And credibility is not just about like, are you a good person? It is part of that. But it's also like, can you solve my problem? And are you as good as you say you are? All of that usually happens once the deal's in pipeline. The brilliant thing about social, when you do it right, is you're doing that stuff before the deal enters pipeline. And that's why you start with good networking habits. Because I can give some examples to this. I've had people show up in my comments on content I'm posting, or respond to things I'm commenting on, or send me interesting DMs, these passion DMs, L&D, learning and development DMs. And we have a great conversation. And of course I view their profile. I'm like, oh, what does this person do? Okay. And we have a good conversation. 3 months down the line, we have another conversation, right? I'm somewhere in their working list or their priority list. And then I actually have a problem because pain is temporary, right? It's not, there's a window of time in which it actually makes sense to solve it. That I'm just going to reach out to them and be like, hey, got any ideas, or can you help me on this? Or vice versa on the outbound motion, obviously. This is where outbound and inbound become a little blended on social, where you just have good conversations and it's basically outbound that becomes inbound. It's a relationship you've built, the credibility you've built, and I will say, I know we're close to the end of the time. The law we've seen is those deals move so quickly. They are absurdly fast. They're like 3 or 5x your normal deal cycle length because you've done all the work you usually do off of a cold call on social well in advance of them actually buying. And it's just this like generative motion, right? It just keeps snowballing on itself.
Yep, 100%. And I mean, it's back to that authentic value add. Like if you can be authentic and you can keep putting value or interesting things in front of them, then you will be top of mind whenever the need is there. And then the other piece that I would add in there, and I think this is a dirty little secret when it comes to intent signaling, is engineer your own intent signaling. Don't use a black box. Don't go out there and like cross your fingers and hope it's going to come up, whatever. Like create content, create messaging. That it would be really fucking weird that you're engaging in this if you didn't have a need or intent or something. I mean, it was like, if you got a highly technical product, share something that's a deep dive that only somebody trying to solve for this as a Python programmer is going to be interested in. And then it's going to be like, it's really weird that you engaged in this if you didn't have a need or want to talk about something.
100%. And it's really funny interacting with sellers. So, let's say a client we work with sells into healthcare. Okay. Engaging healthcare innovation leaders is the easiest thing of all time because the value add there is, did you see this new report on a trend you're passionate about? Like, talk about the easiest way to start a conversation. You're not pitching, again, vampire sales. Like, you're not talking about your product. Yeah, you sell something related to it, but they look at you and say, "Oh, I didn't see this. Thanks so much for sharing." Like, yeah, check out page 17 because I know at your company you're focusing on this because you've done your homework, and I think it's really relevant. And I was curious about X, and just have that conversation. It's the value add doesn't have to be, is usually nothing to do with your product. It's all just about, are they learning? What are they interested in? How can we have a good conversation? That's the magic. Couldn't agree more, Jason.
Absolutely. We got just a couple of minutes left. I know we had quite a few questions out of here. We have one asking about if you don't have Navigator, what tech do you recommend as an alternative to finding your ICP and your targets?
It's a great question. I think you can use a lot of LinkedIn's native search to actually find the specific people. But in terms of like segmentation and understanding who in the market you're targeting, you're going to use a lot of other sales intelligence tools. Preferably your manager has an idea of actually who you sell to, or you do. So, for example, if you know job titles and you know industries, you can use LinkedIn's native search to find people. You just type in inside quotes the job title, you filter by people, and then you filter by a specific industry, and you're going to be able to pull up a list of people that you can contact with. It's a little wonkier if you don't have Sales Nav. Organizing that on the day-to-day can come back to your CRM if you really want to, or God forbid you have pen and paper and you just like take notes and be like, hey, I wanted to do this, and keep yourself organized.
Cool. One last one, essential tech stack outside of the normal. So outside of CRM, sequencing tool, Navigator, data platform, what's your essential piece of tech outside of those normal ones, if there is any?
I would have said something different probably about 6 weeks ago, but they've recently made a bunch of updates, and it's called Aware. And because I'm big on social selling, Aware is huge. I can drop a link in chat for everybody. But the core of it is it allows you to track your comments. It allows you to track your overall views. It's a much better than Shield because you can actually engage inside the app with likes and comments. And so the workflow is really easy. Of my 30-minute daily routines, I'm spending half of it inside Aware, just being able to go through the motions. So it's a huge tool that I've been using recently. That is my recommendation. You can drop this in chat.
That is a new one on me. I will absolutely be going and checking that out this afternoon. But all right, we are at the end of our time. Morgan, before we wrap up, especially given that we've still got questions coming through, how can people track you down and get those questions answered?
A great question, everybody. The best way is to find me on LinkedIn. And I just pulled up my LinkedIn as I was preparing to close out the hour, and there's a lot of connection requests already there. Most of them blank. Proud of y'all. Please feel free, just like get in front of me and ask any questions you have. I'm an open book. There's no thing I won't answer. If I have time to answer something detailed, I'm more than happy to do so. And if you're looking for more resources than just the live show today, you should check out b2bpowerhour.com. We have a bunch of stuff on social selling there, podcast episodes, resources, so much more. We've talked about this a lot, so that's an understatement, actually.
Morgan, this has been a blast, man. We've got to find opportunities to do something like this again.
Absolutely. And Jason, thanks so much for having me on the show today.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.